Hi guys, and a very warm welcome to On the Men Plus. So this is the very first video of the course, and it's probably the most important one. Now, this is the video that gives a little bit of a kind of thesis of what I think is personally going on in these kind of conditions, and what we're going to be doing here at On the Men Plus in order to work towards recovery. So I'm going to give you a little overview of my story, a little bit of an overview of what I think is going on, and then a little bit of an overview of what's going to be coming in the following sections. So if you want to watch any videos in this course, then please give this one a watch because it's super important and it gives a kind of an idea of what we're trying to do here. So before we get going, let's crack in. And first of all, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an introduction. So I'd imagine you've probably been following me for a little while. And if you have, then you will know that about 5 years ago, I came down with long COVID and went from a kind of healthy 22-year-old who was doing a judo, training all the time, loving life, and ended up with quite a considerable case of long COVID. So I was bedbound. I couldn't really do anything for the first few months. I had this weird kind of anxiety, palpitations. I couldn't sleep more than about 3 hours a night, and it was just a nightmare. And I did gradually improve thanks to trying a variety of different things like brain training, like medications, like supplements. And I didn't quite get to the place that I wanted to be. So I felt a little bit stuck. And whilst I was doing things, I was semi-functional. I was at a position where I just was still having this really annoying lingering fog, malaise, and just not feeling comfortable in myself as well, and feeling just a lot of stress all the time. So I tried to solve this rather stupidly by going on a silent meditation retreat, which involved sitting alone with your thoughts without looking at anyone, without speaking to anyone for 10 days. And during this, I had a complete breakdown, essentially, rumination. I developed these horrible pains in my head, my neck, paranoia, anxiety, almost kind of semi-psychosis type state. And it was just horrendous. And that was the lowest point that I have been in. I remember following that being desperate for my long COVID symptoms to come back. I spent a week in hospital, had all of the scans, and they didn't know what to do. But if we skip forward to a more positive note, which is now, over the last 8 or 9 months, I have made unbelievable progress, and I'm back at a position where I'm traveling again, I'm training again. Still have some residual brain fog at points, but I feel like I'm just making progress all the time. I think I've uncovered something that I never realized before, and never would have realized if I didn't have that experience. So just as a little introduction and as a little bit of hope as well, because I truly thought everything was over, and I'm so grateful to be where I am now. So anyways, let's get into a little bit of the theory and why you're here. So I'd imagine if you're watching this, you are probably also semi-functional. So you're probably able maybe to do a little bit of stuff. Maybe you've been able to work a little bit part-time. Maybe you're able to walk about, but you're still having massive issues with brain fog. You're having issues with chest tightness, dissociation, maybe low mood, and all of these problematic symptoms that you just cannot get rid of. So the dizziness might be one as well, these loops. And I would imagine also if you're here, you have probably tried endless supplements. Maybe you've tried niacin. Maybe you've tried, maybe if like me, you had about 30 supplements that you took on a regular basis so much that you would rattle. Maybe you've tried medications. Maybe you've tried hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I did this as well. Did find it quite useful, but again, not like a massive needle mover. Maybe you've tried red light. Maybe you've tried acupuncture. Maybe you've even tried something like apheresis or anticoagulants. I never did that, but I know some people who have. Maybe you've gone proper woo-woo and you've tried energy healing like myself. Maybe you have tried just not being tired as well. I'm sure you've probably heard this suggestion from numerous people, maybe even doctors as well. And we know how that goes. And finally, you probably tried some form of brain training as well. So this might be a course like Gupta, might be a course like DNRS. And whilst you maybe find them really useful to a certain extent, like I did, maybe you feel like there's something that it wasn't quite unlocking. So you're probably also feeling that the nervous system has some kind of a part to play in all of this. You probably have come to that kind of realization, but you're not sure what exactly and how that ties in because it's such a deeply physical disease. You can't figure out why you feel so bad. And again, you know, however, that whatever you're feeling is deeply, deeply physical. And maybe you have these kind of internal vibrations like I did. Maybe you have these, severe fatigue, this very, very visceral feeling. And it makes you question whether this kind of Thoughts, keeping the loop going, as is often purported in brain training, is the real underlying cause, because it seems like swatting away thoughts will maybe help you to notice and become more aware, and you're aware of neuroplasticity, but it's so physical and so visceral that it doesn't necessarily make so much sense. So this is a little a little image of you looking very confused, having tried all of these various therapies around. So my thesis and my what I'm working with essentially is around this role of incomplete survival responses and this kind of lack of emotional processing. So I first of all wanted to just introduce you to the idea of the polyvagal states. So you can see here we have three different states. So in the very first one, we have the ventral vagal, which is very relaxed, social, outgoing, you're feeling happy in the present, etc. Then you have the sympathetic state, which is here. This is your fight or flight mode. This is your, rage, your anger, your irritation, and then also your panic, fear, and anxiety. And we know that even healthy people obviously oscillate between these two. They go up and then they might come back down again. And then something happens, maybe something when they're out and about will happen. They get frustrated, maybe their partner does something, and then they'll come back down again, and then up and then down. And this is a very, very normal response. Now, however, what seems to happen in people who, for whatever reason, whether it be genetic, whether it be, cultural, whatever, a lot of people seem unable to regulate back down to that ventral vagal. So maybe something will happen, but due to distraction, maybe you're a perfectionist, maybe you repress things, maybe you don't feel things fully, you're unable to complete this survival mechanism. And so you don't come all the way bit down and you stay in this fight or flight mode. Then you go up again and you come down somewhat, but not all the way. And up again and again and again, this goes until you edge towards this free state, which is this dorsal vagal. Now, this is where you get the serious stuff like dissociation, numbness, helplessness. And when you're in this kind of state, you build up something known as your allostatic stress, because you are unable to regulate yourself back down to this ventral vagal by doing this kind of survival mechanism, which is a very, very physical process, by the way. And you keep going up and up towards this fight or flight and free state. So when I talk about energy, I don't mean something woo-woo, right? I don't mean this kind of, we hear about energies and things like that. I'm a very logical person. I have a physics background. I like to see things that make logical sense and physiological sense. And when I'm talking about energy, so I'm talking about this energy that doesn't get exercised when it comes when you enter one of the sympathetic states. So we all know that feeling when you start to get agitated, you start to feel rage, you start to feel helplessness, you start to feel panic. This is literal physical energy that has to go somewhere. And we see this very much in the wild. And if you've watched David Attenborough before, you will see this in gazelles. And what they will do, they will see horrendous things. They'll see their parents being mauled to death. They will see, encounter near-death experiences on a regular basis. And yet they don't demonstrate any signs of PTSD or kind of, trauma afterwards. And that is because of a very physical mechanism that they do afterwards, which is this kind of shaking. So if you've ever watched a program like David Attenborough, often you'll see a gazelle looking frightened in this freeze, helpless state. It will get up, it will shake and dispel all of this energy, and it will be able to regulate itself again. Now, the same thing happens in humans, but for whatever reason, like I said, we don't necessarily process that energy, and we don't let that energy go anywhere, and it still has to lodge somewhere. So it hasn't gone, it hasn't been dispelled, so it just builds up in your nervous system. Now, this, as I mentioned, leads to a high allostatic load, and this is essentially your kind of stress bucket that is within your system. So a high allostatic load builds up and up and up, edging more and more into that sympathetic towards that dorsal vagal, as I mentioned, making you a lot more susceptible to any trigger to perpetuate you into a kind of chronic loop. Now, again, to be very clear, this survival energy gets stored very, very physically in your nervous system, hence very, very physical symptoms. It's not a case of a thought loop that is triggering you. It is a very, very physical mechanism that is stuck and needs to be dislodged. Your body, because it naturally wants to complete this mechanism, will try again and again and again to surface it, to bring it up, to try and complete it. But for whatever reason, you will try to resist it. You will distract yourselves from it, and you won't be able to fully complete it. And so you will have this resistance, this avoidance, this distraction, and inability to complete as it builds up and up and up. Now, on a more kind of scientific level, we have the kind of survival loop happening, as we can see here. So as we can see, we have a high allostatic load that leaves us very, very susceptible to some kind of trigger. And this is because of this unresolved stress, this inability to revert back down to the ventral vagal. And then we have a trigger that comes along. And this trigger can come from anything such as a virus, it can come from a bacterial infection, maybe a traumatic event, burnout, accident, anything that is really going to flood your nervous and immune system and again perpetuate this incomplete response. So again, we will have this big buildup of survival energy and it does not get discharged. And then it gets stuck in your nervous system and your brain gets stuck into this hypersensitive interoceptive mode where your brain is incredibly sensitive to any kind of bodily sensations, and these bodily sensations trigger this kind of this loop, and it leads to the survival process trying to be executed over and over again and leading to horrendous symptoms that you again start to distract and avoid. Now, as we know, you probably hear it from a virus like COVID. You have ME/CFS, maybe you have something slightly different, but you'll very, very likely have had a kind of viral response. And again, this emphasizes exactly what goes on with a virus. So again, this is not just anxiety. This is not just in your head. This is not just an unconscious thought loop. This is a physically, a profoundly physical mechanism. And you can see that here. We have the threat, which obviously is the infection or trauma. You have the brainstem, which gets alerted by this immense overwhelm of trying to complete this mechanism. And you can see that the glial cells, which are the brain's immune cells, get triggered. And this causes very real neuroinflammation, hence why I had that kind of pins and needles in my head. You can see that the limbic system then gets sensitized, and we see heart rate changes, gut shifts, fatigue, all of the stuff that you know of. And when the brain gets sensitized in this way, the amygdala gets sensitized, it notices any kind of internal bodily sensations or symptoms as threats. And again, this isn't you noticing it and then getting carried away and going down a spiral. It is it's a physical process and it's unconscious process. So you can see here that we have the sensation that will arise, and that could be like your internal state. It could be your heart rate, whatever. It generates a fear response, a physical fear response. Then you go to this coping mechanism, which generates more fear again. And so the cycle goes round and round and round. Again, like I mentioned, this is a unconscious and a very physical process, and it won't be able to be completed and interrupted until we get this kind of survival energy out of our system. As mentioned again, so this incredibly physical mechanism will remain uncompleted, and once we start to complete that mechanism, we will start to be able to interrupt that loop and reduce the sensitization. So some common signs that this is happening. So you might have noticed sudden waves of panic or dread or shutdown with no clear trigger. And again, if you had a degenerative disorder, you wouldn't have moments where you would be feeling okay, and then others where you would not. It doesn't make sense. So you might be having things like that. You might be having emotional spikes which are tied to physical sensations, maybe chest tightness, gut drops, head pressure. You might feel better temporarily, only for symptoms to rebound. Again, this is a indication of something that is likely to do with the sensitized nervous system, and maybe your body always feels like it's trying to finish something. So for me, I often felt like there's some kind of tension in my lower back, some kind of inability to feel what was going on. And I just felt like it was stuck almost. It was like whenever I would try and lie down, I would lie down on the sofa and I can't fully relax. I can't fully let go and feel that melting into the sofa. And one of the times I did experience this really bizarrely was on that meditation retreat where I was just having the worst symptoms. And yet, after kind of crying and releasing, I had the most bizarre experience when all of these symptoms just dropped off. And I remember lying down on the bed and I was like, oh my God, I can relax for the first time. And it all came back later, but that was a very, very profound moment in my healing. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but I've never been a kind of repressor. Like I'm not an emotionally avoidant person. This doesn't really resonate with me. I've always been quite happy, quite healthy, etc. And again, I want to emphasize that this mechanism is physical and not just emotional. So this emotional repression isn't always about the person who, the man who doesn't speak about feelings or the kind of stoicism or bottling things up. often it can look like these other things, which doesn't allow you to fully feel and fully complete this mechanism. So maybe you were someone who always tried to be the easy one, not have any problems. Maybe you hate making others feel uncomfortable. So you trap that in. Maybe you would cry only when you're alone or not at all, so you don't allow yourself to fully feel those emotions. You intellectualize things very quickly instead of feeling them, so you try and rationalize, you try and make sense very, very quickly, as opposed to letting them manifest. You feel selfish when you're upset, so you override it. You spend your life pushing through with a smile regardless of the circumstance. You downplay your symptoms because you don't want to be dramatic, and you manage everything except what is inside. So I think this is, again, another big reason as to why we see such a commonality with sort of the type A personality types, the really high performing, the high functioning and people pleasing types that we see getting these illnesses. I don't think it's a coincidence. So maybe you recognize yourself in there. I know I certainly do. Now, again, to go back to this case of physicality, and you might be thinking, yes, emotional repression, emotions, yeah, but it's so physical. It's physical inside. And that is because it is. And when we have an overactivation of the nervous system, we can see all of these profoundly physical and scientific mechanisms that are going on. So we see the perceived threat come in. We can see the limbic system, which is a kind of reptilian system, get activated. You see elevated stress hormones, which obviously, high cortisol, adrenaline makes your heart rate and all of these things. POTS and all of these other issues. Glial cell activation, as mentioned, meaning your immune cells in your brain become hypersensitive, and then generate all of that fog. You have reduced energy availability, and then obviously all of these very, very real symptoms which you can see. You even would have things like a limited supply of oxygen to your brain if your amygdala is firing so much and you have glial cell activation. It makes complete sense. So it's not a case of saying, "Oh, this isn't physical," or "This is in your head." That's just complete nonsense. It's a completely physical response, and then the way we deal with this is, again, in a very, very physical and not cognitive way. So that leads me on very nicely to the way out. So how I think we get ourselves out of this, and the way that I have got myself from in that horrendous state about 8 or 9 months ago to where I am now. And the way out, in my opinion, is helping us to process these loops until we are able to allow to process these things fully. So, as mentioned, at the moment we have a trigger, we have an alarm. So the hypersensitive nervous system is taking place. We have the fear. We have a coping or an avoidance strategy, whether it be control, whether it be suppression, whether it be that rumination of, oh, maybe I've done the brain training technique wrong. Maybe I need to. Oh, but can it really be this? I'm not sure. Like, oh, maybe I need to allow the sensations, but. This is all of that kind of repression and this inability and to let things be, and this will to control. So what we want to be doing is allowing the triggers to surface. We are going to welcome them. We're going to notice them without fear. We're going to use somatic and emotional processing techniques such as EMDR, movement, safe anger discharge, and then we're going to allow that energy to discharge in the form of shaking, movement, maybe emotional releases, and then your brain will gradually learn that this is all now over, and you will be able to complete this loop and desensitize your system and make your way towards recovery. So the 3 pillars to healing on the mend. So we have these 3 pillars because I think it's very important to encompass all of these in the work that we're doing. And first of all, we start off with regulation. So this is solely to build safety within the system. So this is stuff like somatic tracking. This is about gargling with the vagus nerve exercises, humming, grounding exercises, tapping. This is stuff to make you feel safe, because we can't work on integration, that is the emotional processing side, until we have a relatively calm system and we're in a position where that work is actually going to be worthwhile doing. So this is the kind of stuff that we're going to be doing when you're maybe in a crash or a little bit of a hypersensitive state, and we're going to help to generally bring that comfort back into your body. Now, pillar number 2 is integration, and this is to process those incomplete survival responses. So this part is incredibly physical, which is why this is a long program, and this is why that we have these regular calls in order for us to physically complete these survival responses. Because I think, contrary to popular belief, I think people think you're just going to have like one emotional release and then suddenly it's all fixed. I don't really believe that. I have had a few times after EMDR, after certain somatic exercises, where I have had a big release, but I think, in my opinion, it's a gradual thing that needs to come out in a gradual way in a safe and supportive environment. And that's why we do regular sessions on somatic emotional release techniques like shaking, movement, EMDR style inspired techniques, bilateral stimulation, movement with awareness, visualization techniques as well of resolution and completion. That is imagining yourself going through and completing that mechanism and allowing your body to and brain to process that. And then finally, we have pillar three, which is guidance, because I have had a lot of support in my journey through experts, and I understand the frustration with a lot of experts when you've experienced something like long COVID, because you feel like they don't listen, they don't understand, they tell you that you just have to sort it out yourself. So I get that, but I do think it is important to have the advice of some experts as well. So, we will be having Q&As with people like therapists, with movement practitioners, with some doctors. There will be workshops on certain medications as well. Like, I've had a lot of benefit from LDN, for example, to help me kind of stabilize and allow me to dive into this work more fully. So I think it's useful to do that. And then obviously the support of a community as well to help each other stay accountable, to provide a safe space where you can do this work and work together. And it's a super important part of the healing process. And that is what we are going to be covering in the coming weeks and months and on the mend. So this is a good introduction, and the following sessions of this course will give you an intro into some of those techniques that we can start with, and then you'll have your very first call coming in the following weeks. And finally, I just wanted to leave you with a message of hope, to be honest. So, I spent 4 years just pushing and crashing and just in such frustration. And it really took it out of me emotionally, physically. And once I did get improvement, I had tried everything. I had, all the brain training. I'd done hyperbaric therapy. I'd spent about 20,000 plus on supplements, and it was so incredibly frustrating. And also, I never could quite believe or get my head around this kind of like nervous system, the deeper kind of processing stuff, because I didn't really necessarily believe it. And then I had that horrendous experience with the silent meditation retreat where to be honest, like I just wanted my life to be over. It was the worst thing. I was in hospital. I was like, there has to be something physical wrong. There has to be something in my brain, because I was getting these spikes of right in my brainstem. I just felt truly, truly horrendous. I was having paranoia, anxiety, neck pain, fatigue. I couldn't do anything, and I was like, there has to be something physical this time. This has to be it. I had a lumbar puncture, I had MRIs, I had scans, X-rays, epileptic tests, all came back clear. And in the recent months, I have had the most profound success with EMDR, the bilateral stimulation, the emotional processing, and I can feel the physical changes of it happening. It's not woo-woo, it's not bullshit, but genuine, real physical results. And, I still have bits of brain fog here. I'm still on my own journey as well, but I'm at a position now where you can see I travel, I work, I train, and yeah, I run this community. So I'm beyond delighted of where I'm at, and I really fundamentally believe that this plays such a huge part in what is going on here, and that combined with the expert support from doctors, from the support from the community, the expert advice, I really truly believe that if you commit and you work alongside and you do all of the calls and you throw yourself in with curiosity and openness, you can have a huge impact in how you feel in the future. This isn't a bullshit course. This isn't you're going to be better in 2 weeks. This isn't just another brain training program. This is a very thorough and integrative and physical process. And it's one that I'm very proud of. So I really hope that you guys enjoy it. So that is everything for this session. I'll see you in the next one of the course, and I will see you in the very first session as well later this week. Take care.